Thank you for tuning in to Tamara for Georgia. I am Tamara Johnson Shealey, your candidate for the United States Senate. I'm an independent Democrat that believes that reparations will make America great. It is time that we unite our country once and for all. Please go to my website. It's tamaraforgeorgia.com. And please join me every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here for Tamara for Georgia. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It is a not so sunny Saturday morning here in Georgia. I am Tamara Johnson Shealey. I'm sorry I'm just a few minutes late, but it has been that kind of day, that kind of morning. Let's see. It is the third Saturday. Y'all know what time it is. It is Mr. Reggie Jackson, and he is in the house. Good morning, Mr. Reggie.
Good morning, Tamara. Good to be here with you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, it's always a pleasure to have you on this third Saturday. Dropping those jewels.
Yeah, we got to heat it up a little bit because it's like 32 degrees in Milwaukee right now, Tamara.
Oh, Lord. In April, look, Mr. Reggie.
Yeah, it's going to be in the 30s for the next 3-4 days.
OMG.
Yeah, so we're dealing with it.
It's chilly here. So if it's cold there, it's chilly here, and we're cold here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the legacy of Brown versus the Board of Education. Wow. We have some comments already. This brother says, let me see his comment. He says he's reading. He says, I'm reading Talking to Strangers, Anxieties of Citizenship Since Brown v. Board of Education by Daniel S. Allen for a reading group. Have you heard of that book, Mr. Reggie?
I have not. I'm going to have to add that to my list of books to read.
Yeah, he said, I can't wait to hear the assessment this morning.
Yeah.
Brown versus the Board of Education. How you been, Mr. Reggie? You've been busy.
Yeah, I've been really, really super busy. Just a lot of stuff on my plate. Just my head has been spinning. I've been so busy. I led a bus tour for some members of Congress here in Milwaukee last week, talking about the history of segregation. I've been involved in doing some work out in our suburban communities around, just having people talk about racism in the suburbs, in the place they don't want to talk about it in. So we've been able to make some inroads in one of the toughest places in Wisconsin to do that, this community called Germantown. It's been a whirlwind, and I've been doing some work with a new organization called the Redress Movement. That's really growing as well. So a lot of stuff going on with me, as always.
It is tough talking about racism, and race relations. But I think, honestly, Mr. Reggie, it's all in the approach. And I think that when you approach it from a place of love, people are very receptive, because I talk about it constantly. And honestly, the pushback that I get sometimes is, I think there's a lot of white people that want to talk about this kind of stuff. They just don't have a safe place to do it, or a place that they don't feel like they will be attacked if they say the wrong thing. So I think we as a people, and I know you're very mindful of this because I've seen your approach, and it is an approach that I see is very engaging. They want to talk to you. And I used to work at this for this white gentleman, and got very close to him. And he asked me one time a question that he felt safe enough to ask me. So I know how important it is to, when you do this work, to do it from a space and a place of love.
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree. I mean, I think that the greatest challenge is really getting people into the space to be part of the conversation. There's a great deal of fear that people are going to have fingers pointed at them. They're going to be called names and all this other stuff. And I say, the approach that I've always kind of had is that, listen, I'm just going to give you the information. I'm not telling you how to feel about it. I'm giving you the factual information, the stuff that you didn't learn in school, because I think most conversations about race, what the greatest barrier to those conversations being what I call productive conversations, Tamara, is simply that people don't know enough history. If they knew the history well, then we would have different conversations. And that's what I've driven people to do. It's like, listen, I know that there are things you don't know about American history. Let me give you those things. And then we're going to have a different conversation that we had before you knew those things. Because you can't talk about, racism not existing and systemic racism not being real if you don't know American history. And most of us don't know it because we leave almost all of the ugly parts out. And so when I've gone out to all of these communities throughout Wisconsin, for those who don't know Wisconsin, only 6.7% of residents of Wisconsin are Black. So once you leave Milwaukee, 61% of Blacks in the state live in the city of Milwaukee. So once you leave kind of southeast Wisconsin, where Milwaukee is, and a few other cities that have a decent Black population, you get to some really very white spaces. And I've been to 51 different communities in Wisconsin talking. And most of those communities are generally like 90 some percent white. So I'm in space with a lot of white people. And, there's a great deal of fear. But this is the other thing that I find, Tamara, is that just as you said, there are a lot of people that do want to talk about it. There are a lot of white people that are fed up with racism too. Like we want to think that all white people are racist, and listen, from my personal experience, I can say that's absolutely just nonsensical to even think that way. That there are white people that are impacted negatively by racism, that are tired of it just as well as we are. I don't think they'll ever be tired to the extent that we are because we're the victims of it. But I think that it's an embarrassment to a lot of white people that racism is still alive and well. And they want to change things. They want to work with us on it. And, when we can get into those collaborative spaces and let people know that, listen, man, I'm going to listen to you. I may not agree with you, but I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to hear what you have to say. I'm not going to debate you. I'm not going to go back and forth trying to convince you to see things my way. I'm just going to listen to you just as well as you listen to me. And then we'll have a good conversation. A session I did recently, Tamara, where I was facilitating some conversation, I was told that I had a woman that was going to be in a space that was going to be very disruptive. One of these people that doesn't want to have these conversations. Man, Tamara, by the end of that conversation, this woman was like, Reggie, I can't wait to follow your column at the Milwaukee Independent and see what you're writing about. So, you can make friends in those spaces, like you said, if you have the right approach. And that's what I try to do. I ain't trying to make nobody mad. I'm just trying to give you the evidence of what racism is, and you do with it what you choose. But I think that when people are given the right information, the stuff that they don't teach in school, then I think people are much further ahead in these conversations, obviously.
I absolutely agree. I remember, and then we'll get started on Brown versus Board of Education, but I just have to tell this story too. I was at an event, and just like you, Reggie, it was this man, and he made it clear that he was a racist. By the time I was done with that man, he was following me around that event, wanting to continue to talk to me. And you're right. There's a lot of people that just don't know enough. And when they get the right information, they have to, processing it, and they want more. They want more. They really do.
Yeah. And, one of the other things I think is really important for those of us from our community that say that, white people don't like racism, but they're not doing anything about it, saying anything about it. The reason that you feel that way is because you're not in those white spaces to hear people. You're not in those white spaces to see what people are doing. I've done it. I've been in some of the whitest communities around the state of Wisconsin talking to white people that are like all in on this. So I think for a lot of us, we never get into those spaces, and we don't know what white people are doing. We don't know what they're saying. And I can tell your audience, Tamara, I have seen some of the most incredible work done against racism in a very, very white state of Wisconsin by white people all over the state. So I think the fact that people aren't in those spaces to see that work, they're not in those communities to see and hear what white people are saying and doing, then there's this mythology that they're not doing anything, that they're content with racism. But I'm telling you, when you get out of your little bubble, and I always tell people, get out of your little bubble, explore the bubbles of other people, you'll actually see. Now, I'm not going to be naive enough to say that means the majority of white people are in that boat, because we know that's not true. We know a lot of white people are in that other boat. But listen, the fact that we have some people that want to work on these issues from that community, that's a good thing. And we need to take advantage of those folks because, listen, it is not easy. I've said this time and time again. Doing this anti-racism work is exceptionally difficult. And this is what white people face when they try to do the work in their communities. They face ostracism. They face losing relationships with their family members, their friends and neighbors, co-workers, people that they've known their entire lives, just kick them to the curb. So if people are brave enough to risk that, then I applaud those people because they don't have to do it. White people don't have to do anything or say anything about racism. And those that are willing to do it, there's a woman I met, Tamara, that lost her relationship with her entire family just because she mentioned Trayvon Martin and the death of Trayvon Martin and the fact that George Zimmerman was acquitted. She lost her relationship with her entire family just because she mentioned that at Sunday dinner. Her father went off on her, cursed her out like she ain't never been cursed out in her life. Her mother didn't defend her. Her sister didn't defend her. Her brother didn't defend her. She lost a relationship with her whole family. They used to have Sunday dinner every Sunday. After she mentioned Trayvon Martin, they have never had Sunday dinner again. She has not spoken to her father since then. So it's a risk. People don't understand. It's a risk when people do that. It's not easy when you're like a very small minority of people that are willing to be courageous enough to do that. But anyway, we could talk about that some other time. Let's talk about Brown. Listen, I've said this time and time again that we love to celebrate stuff and the anniversary of it, and the 50th anniversary, 60th. We love celebrating these milestones, right? But we don't analyze what happens after that milestone is reached. So we all know, we all heard somewhere that, the Brown versus Board of Education ended, school segregation. It did not. It's really a very complicated process that led us to the Brown decision in 1954. And what's even more important is a very complicated situation after that first Brown decision. Most people don't know that the Brown case was that original decision that they said, schools are illegally segregated. But then there was a second Brown decision a year later that was supposedly designed to, remedy the situation. And that's where it became problematic. So that's what I really want to share with you all today, is kind of that process, because people don't know much about Brown. They think they do, but people generally have not studied it well enough to understand the process that led up to it. It goes back to 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson, where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that, segregated, trains in Louisiana were perfectly okay as long as, they were separate and equal. And we all know that they were separate and they were never, ever going to be equal. But that was a precedent that was set by the U.S. Supreme Court in that case. And it was something that was so important that, people from the Black community said, wait a minute, this is wrong. This is problematic. This is something we got to fight against. And they fought and fought and fought and won little battles here and there over many, many decades. And that culminated in reversing that Plessy v. Ferguson decision in the Brown decision in 1954, which said, no, segregated and equal. No, that's just a fallacy. That's not real. That's not how it works. So I want to just share with you that the Brown case was actually a class action case. There were actually 4 cases from around the country that were combined together. The NAACP brought these cases together, and each of the cases was completely different. But this is the interesting thing. So normally when you have a class action, right, you have these, so it's 4 cases, right? And when they go and they add them together, what they generally do is they add the name alphabetically. So whatever the first name alphabetically is will be the name of that case. So you would think that the Brown versus Board of Education, that the first case was the case of little Linda Brown, little 3rd grade girl, and her parents who, filed this suit. But that wasn't alphabetically the first name in those cases. There was another case, a Briggs case from South Carolina. And people, when they hear that, they're like, so why wasn't it Briggs versus Board of Education? Why was it Brown versus Board of Education? And this is where it gets complicated, but it's very interesting why they did this. So the Briggs case was different from the Brown case. The Brown case, they were adjudicating it, saying that segregated schools damaged Black children in terms of how they saw themselves. It made them feel inferior, right? So, the whole famous doll study by Kenneth Clark and his wife, showed Black children dolls and they preferred the white dolls. That was part of the evidence. But in the Briggs case, what the Briggs case was originally arguing was something completely different. They eventually got into the whole doll study and that was part of it. But initially, the Briggs case, when they first filed it, they said, listen, the problem is that Black people are paying for public schools. We're paying for the white schools and the Black schools, and we're not getting our bang for the buck with the Black schools. We have old, raggedy, decrepit, falling apart buildings, don't have desks, don't have chalkboards, don't have an indoor bathroom. The windows aren't sealed, weather is getting in. They were saying that this whole idea of separate but equal is bogus. That there is no equality. We're paying for both schools, but we're not getting anything. And the white schools are like these brand spanking new brick buildings, very well maintained, and the Black schools are the exact opposite. So that was what their challenge was, is that you literally had 17 states that had separate schools for Black and white kids at the time that the Briggs case in 1952 was filed. So they said, listen, we should challenge the fact that these states are maintaining the segregated schools, not just the fact that they're segregated, but the fact that they're not funded equally. That's what the Briggs case was about. So imagine what happens if you challenge these states who are maintaining these segregated schools that are certainly not equal in status in terms of the pay of the teachers, the pay of the administrators, and just the functionality of the schools. If that was a challenge, then that is something huge, because now you have somebody to hold responsible. Now you can say the state of South Carolina, the state of Georgia, state of Mississippi, state of Alabama, all these different, you can blame the states and you can hold the states accountable. That's what Briggs was about. But guess what? Brown wasn't about that. Brown was saying, oh, these schools are damaging these little Black children and messing up their psyches. And so what they ended up doing, the Supreme Court and the NAACP together combined to say, yeah, we're going to challenge it based on that the segregated schools are basically making Black children feel inferior. So what ends up happening, they issued the decision. And if you read it, you'll see what they say. They say that, the problem with segregated schools is that they're damaging Black children by making them feel like they're, inferior in some way, shape, or form, right? But that's not really what those Black families wanted. They wanted to say, listen, man, just we're okay having separate schools, but we don't want our schools to be raggedy, run down, beat up. We want, if you're going to have separate schools for Black and white children, the schools should be equal quality, right? I'll give you an example of something I discovered in my hometown. So my mother went to these segregated schools in Mississippi, right? So there's a website I was looking at a couple years ago, and I found pictures of the schools in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, right? So I'm like, oh, this is cool. I get to see these old pictures of the schools. Oh, that's the school my mother went to, that my aunts went to, all that. I'm like, I'm really excited to see these pictures. Like, oh, now I get to see what they've told me about all my life, right? But then I look at some of the white schools in Tallahatchie County. So I'm like, man, the schools don't look the same. But the most important pictures I found, Tamara, it was a picture of the school library in the high school, a white high school. And there was another picture of the library for the Black high school. And this is what blew me away. The picture of the library in the white high school, they had all of these bookshelves around, the students sitting at the tables, all these books. Every bookshelf was full of books, like 7, 8 stories high. I mean, books everywhere, right? And then I looked at the picture of the library in the Black high school, and the bookshelves were like 8 stories high, but they only had literally one shelf with any books on it. All the rest were empty. And I'm like thinking, so this is what separate but equal is. It's a fallacy. So you can't tell me that this white high school and this Black high school are equal, because where are all the books for the Black folks at? So that to me should have been the challenge that they presented. But what they did instead is they said, oh, no, the schools are damaging Black children, psychologically. And okay, yeah, they were. That's absolutely true. Because you go to that raggedy school, it's pretty hard for you to feel good about yourself, obviously, especially when you driving past on the bus and you see the white school that looks so much better than the regular little school you're going to. So it does do something to you. But ultimately, how can you hold somebody accountable for that? Who can you point to say you have to fix this? And the reality is that's what the Supreme Court did. So the Brown decision, Brown 1 said the schools are illegally segregated, but Brown 2, now this is where the Supreme Court really screwed up. And I think they did it on purpose. I don't think it was an accident. This is what they said. They said, now listen, we could order some federal courts to make these southern states equalize the schools, figure out how to eliminate segregated schools, create integrated schools. We could do that, but no. We know that those southern states, listen, we know those some good people down there, and they want to fix things. Tamara, we're going to give them the opportunity to fix things. We're gonna let those local school districts fix the problem. Wait a minute, they the ones that created the problem, and now you telling me that you're going to give them a year? Which is what the Supreme Court did. We're going to give y'all a year to come up with a plan to fix the segregated schools. This is what the Supreme Court did. And they said, do it with all deliberate speed. Those infamous words, which nobody can even define to this day. What does all deliberate speed mean? It means whenever the heck you're ready. And guess what? Those states were not ready. And what ends up happening after a year passed by, and the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, and them were really upset. They basically told the Supreme Court, like, listen, you ruled that the schools are illegally segregated. They said you should demand immediately that they fix that problem. But the Supreme Court was like, no, come on, man. Let's give these good white folks down south a chance to remedy this situation, knowing that they would not. They had to know they wouldn't. So this is what ends up happening. Brown 2. They said with all deliberate speed. And then the southern states are basically like, well, we don't have to listen to the Supreme Court. They can't tell us what to do. How are they going to enforce this? How are they going to make us integrate the schools? So guess what they do? They do nothing. They do absolutely nothing. And not just for like a short period of time, but in 1957, you have a group of senators that issue a manifesto. They call it the Southern Manifesto, Tamara, the Southern Manifesto. Well, they basically they point their finger at the federal government saying, you can't make us integrate our schools. You can't do it. I dare you to make us do it, is basically what they said. Now, think about this. You were 22 Southern senators in Congress at the time. 19 of the 22 signed this Southern Manifesto and said, yeah, the Supreme Court can't tell us what to do. Like, wait a minute. You guys are part of the U.S. Senate. Like one of the three tiers of our government, right? And you're telling one of the other tiers of the government to screw yourself. You can't tell us what to do. It's like, what's wrong with y'all? But this is what they did. And then as a result, you start to see state after state that say, well, we're not going to do what y'all tell us to do. And one of the culminating moments of this is you start to see white folks around the South in particular, in Texas, in Tennessee, and some other places, when the schools decide to do the right thing and say, okay, we're gonna let a handful of black students come into the schools, they attack the black students. There are mobs, angry mobs of white people attacking these black kids, attacking the police that are trying to protect them, and it just blows up and becomes crazy. So now what is the vision in people's mind about school integration becomes violence. Oh, when they bring black kids in, there's violence. They ignore the fact that all of the violence is from crazy white people, right? The racist white people, they ignore that. Like it's somehow these black kids cause these white people to be violent. No, they chose to be violent. And so what ends up happening, you had 3 major incidents of like massive violence. And then you had Little Rock 9, right? September 1957. We've all heard the story. We've seen the videos, the black kids escorted into the school. But this is the part that we missed. When they first came, those 9 black children, when they were first told by the courts in that state, Arkansas, said, yeah, y'all good. The federal courts ruled, yeah, y'all good. Y'all can go to the school. Okay, go ahead. Y'all good. That first day they were supposed to go, there were 9 of them, but one of the girls, she got the instructions messed up. She went by herself, and guess what happened? Those white people threatened to lynch this little girl They literally, they were like, grab a rope and throw it over that tree branch over there. Grab her. Let's lynch her. I mean, they were just losing their minds. One black girl. The rest of them were like, where's she at? So anyway, luckily for her, a member of the NAACP was there and grabbed her and threw her into a taxi and got her out of all of that mess. But literally, when they all came together, this is what happened. This is what they faced. The governor of Alabama said, listen, I know that the Supreme Court said y'all can come to school here, but guess what? We're not going to let y'all come in. So what he did is he called out, state troopers, and they blocked, and the National Guard, they blocked the black students from coming into the school. So when you see the images of the troops that are there supporting them moving into the schools, they should show you first that it was some different troops, the National Guard and state troopers, that were standing there with bayonets sticking them in the face of these kids saying, y'all not coming into this school. And it was like really almost 3 weeks later before, President Eisenhower, after playing golf, he was so busy playing golf that he couldn't do anything about this critical situation in Arkansas. He finally said, oh, yeah, we can't let this happen. We're calling the 101st Airborne and send them down there to Little Rock and help them, figure out how to protect them kids. So it was literally 3 weeks later before they finally let these Little Rock 9 into the school. And if you read the histories of what they said happened, it was horrible. That whole school year was terrible. You had the troops there supposedly protecting them, but they didn't really protect them. They made sure that they didn't get killed outside the school walking in, but they got harassed. They got, just some of the most horrible things you can think of happened. But they fought through it. These are some brave kids, and they deserve a great deal of credit. But after all of that, Tamara, after that first year, the governor of Alabama was like, what the heck? This is setting a bad example, letting these black kids into this school. We're going to shut the school down. And they shut down Central High School in Little Rock. There were several high schools in Little Rock, but that was like the best. That was the exclusive high school, right? So they didn't want any more black kids coming. So they literally shut the schools. And then the federal government's like, well, what do we do? They shut the schools. And so a federal judge told them, open the schools back up. And they're like, we're not going to open the schools back up. And then they talked about it, and they said, we're going to leave the schools closed for 2 years. So here you have this wonderful story, the Little Rock 9 getting into the school and matriculating to it. But they don't tell you that, they closed the school. So it's like, it's hilarious that we teach history in such a way that we talk about the good part of the Little Rock 9 story. Yeah, they walked in and they had the 101st Airborne protect them. They don't tell you about the part where the state troopers and the National Guard sticking bayonets in their face, say y'all not coming into school, or the harassment that they dealt with, or the fact that afterwards the Governor Faubus said we're gonna close the school. Right? You don't hear that part of the story. Most people don't. I doubt if they do. So this is what ends up happening. 10 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision that it integrated the schools in America, 10 years later, in those southern states that had previously had all of these, segregated schools, you had less than 3% of black kids going to integrated schools 10 years later. Less than 3%. But guess what? In some states, like your state of Georgia, my state of Mississippi, Alabama, and several others, that number was less than 1% of black kids were going to integrated schools 10 years after Brown. So what does that tell you? That tells you that Brown didn't work. And this is the thing with me. I grew up in Mississippi, a little town in Mississippi. It wasn't until 1970, Tamara, that the people in Mississippi were finally forced to integrate the schools in Mississippi. 1970. This is 16 years later, and they're finally going to integrate the schools. So it shows you that despite what people say, well, yeah, we celebrate that anniversary of the Brown decision, you're not celebrating anything because nothing really happened. And this is the other part. This is something that dramatically shifted education in America. So some people in Prince Edward County, Maryland said, man, listen, we ain't letting no black kids come into our schools with our white kids. We are not going to do it. We don't care what the Supreme Court says. And then the Supreme Court, federal court judge rules them. No, y'all got to do this. Y'all got to do this. The federal, Supreme Court said y'all got to do this. Y'all got to. And guess what they did? 1959. They said, we're going to just close all the schools. Every one of the public schools, we're going to close in the entire county. Every one of them closed. And they kept the schools closed for 5 years, Tamara. 5 years. No public schools in the county for 5 years. Federal judges tell them to reopen the schools, reopen. They were like, man, we ain't reopening the schools. You can't make us. How can you make us reopen the schools? And they fought it for 5 years. They kept them schools. This is what they did. They weren't dummies. They said, well, listen, if we close the schools, that means white kids don't have any place to go to school either. So what did they do? They started the Prince Edward Foundation, Tamara, and they used tax money from the state and they opened private academies for white kids to go to school. So those 5 years the schools were closed, white kids could go and access education at these private academies. No black people were allowed to go to those private academies. So the black kids were just out. You know, they opened up a couple freedom schools here in churches and whatnot. But for the most part, in that county, no black kid had an education for 5 straight years. But the white kids got to go to those private academies. And I tell people that's the first time in American history where you saw people going to private schools that didn't have money. Prior to that, if you was going to send your kids to private school, that meant you had to pay and you had to have money. Nobody subsidized it. They, for the first time in U.S. history, subsidized private schools for white kids. And so you wonder why so many private schools nowadays, why so many white kids are in private schools nowadays, because they set the example way back then. Prince Edward County said, we're gonna give y'all access to school. We're not gonna let y'all, miss out. We're gonna give y'all access. And so you had this massive resistance campaign all over the South that basically said the Supreme Court can't make us do it. And then finally, in the early 1970s, the federal judges started mandating, saying, no, listen, we gave y'all enough opportunities to fix it. Y'all haven't done anything. We're going to demand that y'all integrate the schools. So y'all going to have to start busing some black kids to some of these, well managed and well, schools that have funding. We're gonna allow black kids to get into some of those schools. Let me tell you what happened in Milwaukee. Now, this is crazy. Milwaukee never had a law that said you had to have separate schools for black and white kids, right? But as the black population was growing from like 21,000 in 1950 to 62,000 in 1960 to 105,000 in 1970, obviously a lot of those people were kids, right? So the Milwaukee public schools had a policy that they called intact busing. And this is how it worked, Tamara. They said, listen, well, we know that, there's increasing number of students in the district. Now, it wasn't increasing number of white students. Their numbers are actually starting to go down a little bit. Increasing number of black students. So the way Milwaukee is divided is that the black people live on the north side and white people live on the south side, right? So what you had is they said, well, we need to build some new schools. We're getting a lot of new students. Now, they're not getting a lot of new students on the south side because they're actually starting to lose white kids. Guess where they build all the new schools at, Tamara? You think they built them on the north side where there was a need, where the black kids were growing? Do you think that's where they built the schools?
Mm-mm.
No, of course not. That doesn't make any sense. We're going to build new schools on the south side. You don't even have a need for new schools on the south side, but that's what they did. They built new schools for white kids. And so on the north side, what they did is, we're going to build an addition onto the schools on the north side. So guess what? Black parents was like, man, our kids are missing out. So they had to start busing black children to the south side. This intact busing, this is what they did. They went to the black schools and they said, okay, listen, some of y'all are going to go to these schools on the south side, these all white schools. But when you get there, you're going to be separated from the white kids and the white teachers. Not only are we going to bring y'all on the bus, but we're going to bring y'all teachers too. So those black teachers, well, y'all can come to this school on the south side, but y'all gonna be like in the basement of the school, or maybe we'll put some trailers on the playground where y'all can teach these black kids, because we're not gonna allow any of you black teachers to teach white kids in Milwaukee. Of course not, right? So this intact busing means that black kids not only don't have any contact with the rest of their peers, they don't have classes with them, they don't have recess with them. Even when it came to lunchtime, Tamara, a lot of the schools is what they did. Oh, black kids, it's lunchtime. Y'all go out, get on them buses and go back over there to y'all neighborhood schools on the north side and eat lunch. And then once y'all finish, y'all come on back down here. Come on back down here, right? You even had one school in Milwaukee where the first day that they bused the black kids to the school, It was a high school. They literally had the entire football team meet the bus and beat the crap out of a bunch of the black students as they were getting off the bus. That's how racist Milwaukee is, right? So I remember one time I was doing this program and I was talking about segregation and some of these things, right? And this white guy got really upset. Reggie, well, I was bussed. In the 70s, I was bussed and those black kids didn't treat me well. And, they called me hunky and they called me all kinds of stuff. And I said, okay, sir, I appreciate you sharing that experience. But your experience was not the same as those black kids that were bused intensely by the district where they were separate. I said, did they keep you separate from your black classmates? No, they didn't. Did they refuse to allow your teachers to teach you? Did you have to go back to the South Side to go eat lunch? Did any of that happen to you? Well, no, none of that happened. So, okay, so what's your point? You're trying to act like busing was the same for white kids and black kids. It wasn't. Your experience with busing, okay, it was bad. I agree with that. Okay, you were probably traumatized by it, but you weren't traumatized in the way that these black kids were. And it was a boatload more of them that were bused intensely. And so Milwaukee public schools were segregated illegally. There was a lawsuit filed in 1965. It took to 1976 for the Supreme Court to say, yeah, the schools, they're jacked up. Y'all got to fix them. This is this is my experience. I left Mississippi where they integrated the schools in 1970, Tamara, right? Came to Milwaukee, starting third grade in Milwaukee. From third grade through eighth grade, I did not have a single white classmate in any schools I attended. I had white classmates in Mississippi, in my hometown of Mississippi. White classmates there, moved to Milwaukee, third grade to eighth grade, not a single white classmate. I didn't have white classmates till I went to high school because I caught the city bus and rode all the way to the South Side to a high school on the South Side of Milwaukee. And I had white friends there, we did things together. But at the end of the day, I never saw those white kids because I got on the bus going one way and they went the exact opposite way. So I found it very ironic that I moved from, a place that's considered one of the most racist, segregated places in the country, Mississippi. And I moved to Wisconsin. It's like, wait a minute, I can't even go to school with white kids in Milwaukee. This is crazy. And this is part of the reason that I jokingly call Wisconsin Mississippi. Because listen, if y'all don't know, now. It's a very racist place here. And I want people to understand that what Brown promised, it never delivered. Schools are literally more segregated today than they were before Brown. Now, people debate whether that's good or bad. And this is the thing that we have to understand about the nature of segregated schools. Prior to Brown, most black kids went to inferior schools in terms of the physicality of the schools. So the old raggedy little buildings. Sometimes they had desks, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they had chalkboards, sometimes they didn't. But they had something that was much more important. They had dedicated black teachers that loved those little black kids and said, we're going to do the best we can for y'all. We don't have all of the fancy accoutrements that the white schools have, but we're going to make sure that you get a good education. Now, education may be limited to eighth grade because maybe they don't have a high school for black kids, but we're going to make sure that by the time you matriculate through school that you have learned the value of education. You have gotten to learn how to read, write, do arithmetic. Those black teachers, those black administrators love those black kids, Tamara, and took care of them. They nurtured them. They did the best they could do. I talked to my family members who were in those schools, and they were like, listen, the school was ragged. It was beat up, but man, the teachers were great. They loved us. They made us, be able to learn in an environment that wasn't a conducive environment physically, where, there was no bathroom in the school. You had to go out, somewhere in the woods to use the bathroom all the time. But it was okay because they loved us. They cared for us. They did what our parents asked, which was, I'm sending my child to you. Take care of my child while they're in your care. And that's what they did. But guess what happens? Brown happens. And eventually when those Southern states said, oh yeah, we're going to do the right thing. Okay, we're going to do something about the segregated schools. What they did was this, Tamara. They closed all the black schools. They closed the black school. They were like, okay, so now y'all come over to the white schools now. They closed the black schools. So what happened to all those black teachers? Do you think they were able to, let me send my resume over to the white school and apply for a position? No, they weren't going to hire your behind. So a lot of the black teachers in the South, thousands, tens of thousands of the black teachers lost their jobs. And what they ended up doing, many of them just said, well, I want to continue to be an educator. I'm going to move out of the South. So they moved to places like, Cleveland, or, they moved to New York, or they moved to Chicago. They moved somewhere out of the South because they wanted to continue to be educators. So what you have now is you have Black children prior to Brown who were in inferior physical facilities, but still had people that cared about them, that loved them, that nurtured them in the way that they should have been, did the best they could. And now you send them to these previously all white schools with all white teachers, all these white kids who are going to harass them and call them all kinds of names. Do you think that they're going to get the same level of education they got in those Black schools? They did not. And so what ends up happening is Brown promised that, the segregated schools are messing with the Black kids' psyche. It's making them feel inferior. Well, how do you think they're going to feel when they go to a school and the white teachers ignore them? Or the white teachers are harassing them? The white kids are yelling at them, cursing at them, bullying them. Do you think that's not just as damaging, if not more so? At least when they were in the Black school, it was a raggedy building that, okay, I don't feel great because I'm in a raggedy building, but ain't nobody harassing me. The teachers are listening to me. The teachers are doing what they're supposed to do. But now I go to this previously all white school, and now the teachers don't even listen to me. I raise my hand. They don't ask me to respond to anything. So you go from a situation where the Supreme Court says that segregated schools are damaging Black kids' psyches to putting them in previously all white schools where their psyches are damaged even more. And then we're wondering why there's this so-called achievement gap, because Black kids are in school systems around the country, Tamara, where they are not valued. They don't go into those buildings and pick up a book that sees Black faces in the books, right? In the history books. They don't go to the library and find a bunch of books written by Black authors, about their stories. They don't see that. So what they're doing is they're sitting in schools and like, man, y'all want me to read what? What, these classics? This ain't classic for me. It may be classics for white people. You want me to read To Kill a Mockingbird? This is an American classic, one of the greatest books ever, supposedly America's favorite book ever, To Kill a Mockingbird. And if anybody's ever read To Kill a Mockingbird, listen, I ain't got a problem with the book. People can write a book, do whatever. I don't think you should be banning books. But listen, I will not be comfortable as a Black kid sitting in the class where the N-word is used over and over and over and over and over. Like I used to know the exact number of times it's in the book, but it's a ridiculous number. And listen, these are the white characters that are saying the N-word, not the Black characters, right? So you're supposed to sit in this class, right? Now imagine this, Tamara. You in class and I'm your teacher. Like, okay, Tamara, we're going to read out loud from To Kill a Mockingbird. So, okay, Tamara, can you read this section here? And so now you're reading what this white character is saying, and N-word this and N-word that. How comfortable are you going to be reading that book?
You know what? We read that book, and I'm gonna tell you, I have absolutely no memory of what it is about. And I remember that I think there's like this, whatever, when we read it, I went through it, and that's where it ended. I can't even tell you what that book is about. It's like a blank for me.
This is the Atticus Finch, this attorney who defends a Black man who was accused of raping this white woman. Obviously, he didn't do it. And, he is appointed the case. He didn't volunteer for the case. White people say, when I read To Kill a Mockingbird and Atticus Finch doing what he did to defend that Black man, that made me want to go to law school, wanted me to become an attorney. But listen, he didn't volunteer for it. It was assigned to him, number one. And then this is the crazy part. The white people, it's such an inspiring story what Atticus Finch did and his daughter. And but dude, at the end of the story, the Black dude is found guilty. He goes to jail, he tries to escape, and they shoot him in the back and kill him.
That's probably why I don't remember it. It's
from
like,
my perspective,
it was too much for me. I don't.
Tamara, it's not a feel-good story for you or any other Black person that reads the book. Now, for white people, they're like, the heroic Atticus Finch makes me feel so good, but that's not a heroic story for us. It doesn't end well for the one Black character in the book. The man gets killed,
and why I just erased it from my memory immediately.
So somehow we're supposed to sit in classrooms. Our children are supposed to sit in classrooms and read these classics, and they have nothing to do with us and our experience, or it's shining a bad light on our experiences. And you wonder why Black kids are behind reading. The stuff that you're making them read is stuff that they're not interested in. Let me tell you this story. When I was a teacher, my next to last year I taught, working with some 8th grade students, right, in the classroom. And, we're doing reading. So they got this big, gigantic, thick reading book. And they got all of these, pieces of poetry, short stories, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's a bunch of different genres of reading. And so, the thing I liked about the book was that for every, piece they had in it, they gave you a little biography of the person who wrote it, right? I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. You get to learn a little bit about the author. So one day I'm just sitting, and I'm going through the book over my lunch break, and I'm just, paging through it. I'm like thinking, oh man, a lot of this stuff was written like a really long time ago. They got something that was written like 1,000 years ago in the book. I'm like, I don't think the kids can really relate to that. I can't even relate to that, right? And then I started looking, and I created a spreadsheet. That's how my brain works. I created a spreadsheet of all of the stuff and the dates when it was written. And most of it was written in the 1800s and the 1900s through like 1960. Now, anybody knows anything about Black history knows it wasn't a whole lot of positive stuff going on for Black people in the 1800s and early 1900s through 1960. So I'm looking, I'm like thinking, these Black kids, all of the students in the school were Black, with the exception maybe 2 or 3. Where are they going to find a story in here? First of all, these are real old stories. They don't even understand the language they're using, the slang and all of this stuff. So they can't even understand what's going on at that time period. And they don't see any characters look like themselves. In a few, they do have some stories written by Black people, but most of it is old, right? And I know that my students used to be like, Mr. Jackson, you're just an old dude. You don't understand how young people think. And I'm like, you're right. Because I'm not your age. I haven't experienced what you experienced. But this is what I told the teacher. I said, listen. There's only 3 stories in the whole book. This is a book that's like 600 pages. There's only 3 stories that were written in the 1980s. Nothing written in the 1990s or 2000s. Now, this was like 2016 when I was teaching. So these students are supposed to read these stories and be excited about them and like have a thirst for reading. And they're reading a bunch of stuff that they cannot. It's like, what does this have to do with me? I'm not seeing myself in any of this. I can't even find something written since I was born in this book that's supposed to be so important. And this is part of the challenge we have. We talk about Black kids, the low reading scores in 3rd grade, 8th grade, all these other things. But listen, it's about what you got them reading. So I told the teacher, and both of us did this. We went and found books written by Black people and written since these children were born, right? So at least be something that they could resonate with. And so the teacher started saying, well, we're going to go over this genre of poetry, but instead of using the poems in the book, we're going to use these poems by X, Y, and Z person, right? And the kid's like, oh, cool. That Black lady wrote the poem, that Black dude wrote the poem. Oh, yeah, cool. Listen. So they got into it, right? Because now they can see themselves in it. That's not happening in schools, though. And this is why our Black kids are suffering. It's like, they are not getting an education where they see themselves in those stories. They're not seeing it in the history classes, the science class. They talking about all of these wonderful white scientists who discovered this and discovered that. What about the Black people that did it? How come they're not in the books? And you're wondering why Black kids, Hispanic kids don't love reading, because you're giving them garbage to read, stuff that they have no interest in. And so when it comes to where we are with the legacy of Brown was supposed to fix something. It was supposed to make it so that Black kids had an opportunity to get an equal education to their white peers. But come on, we know that's not going to happen. Texas, the state of Texas, buys more textbooks than any other state in the country, right? And because they buy such a large number of textbooks, the textbook manufacturers like, man, we can't be creating like a bunch of different textbooks. Like, okay, Wisconsin want a different one, Michigan want a different one, Massachusetts, Vermont, Idaho. No, we can't do all of that. That's too much. That's too expensive. So, okay, since Texas buys the most, we're just going to give everybody the books that they use in Texas. And Texas is like, we just passed a law that says you can't teach anything about Mexican-American history in history class. So guess what? The textbooks don't include anything about Mexican-American history. And you got a state that's got a boatload of Mexican-Americans in it, but legally their textbooks can't have any of their stories in it. It's against the law, Tamara. So why is it that we think somehow we're going to even the playing field with these Black and Latino kids and white kids? It's not going to happen because we're doing the wrong thing. And this is what's most important. And I say this when I go out to these very, very white communities, and I say, listen, the demographics of America are changing. You can build all the walls you want to build, but it won't make a difference because two factors are driving the demographic change. Number one is that white people are the oldest people in the US. You have a much smaller percentage of women of childbearing age than any other group in the country. Black people are second. We got a lot of old Black people too, and not nearly a large percentage of our population is women of childbearing age. But when you look at the Latino population, they have by far the highest percentage of women of childbearing age. So guess what happens when women are of childbearing age, Tamara? They have children, right? So the growth in the Latino population is driven by that. It's not driven by immigration. It's not because all those people are coming over the border illegally. No, it's because they have a bunch of young women that are having children, which is what young women generally do, right? So that's what's driving the demographic shift. That's why it's more Latinos in the country now than Blacks, because we're way older than they are. And this is the other thing. More than half of all babies under a year of age in the US are babies of color today, Tamara. More than half. More than half of all children in public schools since back in 2014, it's been the case. More than half of all children in public schools are children of color. So what does that tell us about the future of America? That the future of America is that we're going to have to figure out how to make these schools work better for Black and brown students. Because if we don't, America's going to be in a well of trouble competing on an international scale. I say this, that for years, people were like, well, the schools are doing okay. Yeah, as long as the white kids were doing okay, the schools were fine. But as soon as white kids slipped a little bit, oh, there's a crisis in education. We have a national crisis. We need to do something. They came with all of these new laws, no child left behind, all this other stuff, because white kids slipped a little bit. I was like, wait a minute. What about the Black kids and brown kids that have continued to fall further and further behind? What about them? It wasn't a crisis when they were being challenged. But so what I always say, as a person who taught for 8 years, Tamara, I tried my best. I did everything I could. I thought, get some more Black male teachers in the school. It makes a difference, a role model for these young men, all this, working in middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders mostly. I thought that was going to be a huge difference. And when I started at the school that I spent the most time at, we had more Black male teachers at that school than any other school in Milwaukee, Tamara. It was the bomb. I mean, the school was a national blue ribbon school. People were begging to get their children into the school. But unfortunately, we had a principal that didn't like black male teachers. She said we didn't know how to teach. So in the 6 years I was at the school, we went from having the highest number of Black male teachers of any school at MPS. 6 years later, when I left, there were no Black male teachers left in the school. There were only 2 male teachers left in the school, the gym teacher and like a first grade teacher. So we went from having a school that was a great school, people were begging to get their kids into, that people was literally running up to the school to grab their kids and transfer them somewhere else. So I realized that it did make a difference having those Black male teachers in the school, as long as they were empowered by the administrators. And we just so happened to have a principal who didn't do that. And the school just went down the toilet after that. But I left feeling, when I left education, the last school I worked at was a charter school. Now, listen, there's some very good charter schools. There's some very bad charter schools. I don't have an opinion about charter schools overall, but this was my experience at a charter school in Milwaukee. I was there for the first year and the second year. And like this past week, Good Friday, like just imagine to go back to 2017 and the week leading up to Good Friday, they called us into a meeting on that Wednesday and said, the school is closing, y'all. We're shutting down. Milwaukee Public Schools is coming to take over the building after Easter break is over. And we're like, what? They're like, oh, yeah. They'll be here Thursday. If y'all want to apply with jobs with MPS, y'all just come on in. But everybody's fired. We're like, what? How you firing us like right before? You done turned Good Friday into Bad Friday for everybody up in here, right? And so that's what happened. A lot of us just left. So that was my last day as a teacher, literally. Now, I had already been planning on leaving because I felt I was complicit in miseducation of my students and I didn't want to be a part of it. So my experience with education ended very poorly, but I didn't want to be a part of a system that wasn't working very well. And so let's stop celebrating Brown, please.
Oh. Education in this country.
Yeah, we got a long way to go.
We got a long way to go.
Long way to go.
I was one of those students that went from I was in the M program and was bused over to a predominantly quote unquote white high school. And we have a long way to go. If I'm still remembering, my experience, we have a long way to go. So, Mr. Reggie, it is always a pleasure. It is always a pleasure. Every third Saturday, every third Saturday, Mr. Reggie is our guest. Go to his website, reggiejacksoninc.com. He has been hosting a Reparations Sunday initiative with us for the past 4 months. We're 4 months in, Mr. Reggie. My gosh, a lot of great information. His website will have this compiled and you can go back and watch it once we're done with the series. But if you want to join us, reparationssunday.com for the month of May, please join us. Mr. Reggie, thank you. It is always a pleasure.
Absolutely, Tamara. Good to be here with you. Love the comments. Thank you all for those comments. Appreciate it.
Yes, and I'll see y'all back here same time next Saturday, everybody. Have a great weekend.
When we come to Washington in this campaign, we're coming to get our check. Young prodigies. Grow. Free.
Reparations, Martin said we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud, 1, 2, mic check. Cream, cash rules everything around me. Dream, my legacy, you can't stop me. Coming for our 40 acres, HR 40 and our paper.
Kicking the door, coming for our 40 acres and more. Our 6.4 trillion. Miss that no, we fought the Civil War. We came from the poor.
Start from the bottom, we still on the floor. We pray to the Lord.
Amen.
Picking the cotton, our fingers are sore.
Straight out the underground, escaping from slavery. The only cemeteries that we had were the trees. Watching our bodies while they blew in the breeze. Thinking to the north side to get free.
That way came from slavery. Where's all the marijuana stay on me? Put her head on the door, put the werewolf scheme. Stick to the north side to get free.
Reparations, Martin said we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud, 1, 2, mic check. Cream, cash rules everything around me. Dream, my legacy, you can't stop me. Coming for our 40 acres, HR 40 and our paper.
We taking them back. Putting Pettis Bridge on the map. Police came with the strap. That Sunday was bloody, no cap.
Stop capping.
Speaking of cap, Kaepernick taking knees at the flag. Where my justice at? We built this nation, better give me them racks. All fat, just imagine a little bit of gasoline. 4 girls got bombed back in 63.
400 years, yeah, we still ain't free. Our rise, we rise, taking it.
Kaepernick.
Reparations, Martin said we coming for our check. Reparations, say it loud, 1, 2, mic check. Cream, cash rules everything around me. Dream, my legacy, you can't stop me.
Coming for our 40 acres, HR 40 and our paper.
We stuck in the trap, with no shoes, trying to pull up bootstraps. Increasing the gap, wealth got bigger, so we had to adapt. Discriminated cause we black, I know it worth more than I know it's a fact. They tryna feel scraps, strike me on board so we can't come back.
30 years ago on April 19, Yusef and Try Remy Chemical Reed.
If it happened to them, think it happened to me. It's criminals out of 5.